Now we have a brief understanding of macros and calories. We will try to use some of the knowledge in the previous video we will have hopefully gained to understand what to have for an individual's intake on a daily basis. So we need to take a ballpark figure for us to start from and then work backwards from. So we want to find where roughly we want to begin with, depending on our goals, depending on us as an individual. I just like to use a very simple equation, not really based on much. There's much more complicated ones out there that take into account activity levels and maybe lean body mass. So if someone is particularly overweight, you will find, obviously when they step on the scales, a lot of that is going to be fat versus muscle rather than more muscle than fat. So anyway, I'm not going to go into such complicated equations. So what I'm going to do is have you go anywhere between 24 and 34 and then times that by your body weight in kilos. So the closer down to 24, the more aggressive your deficit is going to be. The closer up towards 34, the more aggressive your bulk is going to be. And the closer to around 30, the more around maintenance you're going to be. And this is just purely a ballpark figure to work from. So it's not exact, but we start to get the idea as we track our progression down the line. If you're unsure what I mean by tracking progression there, I put a video out there on that, so go watch that, then come back to this. I'm going to take an 80 kilo individual who wants a slight deficit. So we're going to go 80 times 27, 80 being the kilos, 27 being the kind of number picked out of thin air roughly of getting us to our slight deficit. And that equals 2,160. So that's the calories we're going to be aiming for on a daily basis. Now we want sufficient amounts of protein whilst we're in this deficit. If you're unsure as to why, again, got a video on that. Go watch it. Come back to this once you've watched it. So we want to be anywhere between about 1.6 to 2.9 grams per kilo of body weight. So normally I've suggested in the past to go between 1.6 to 2.2. I'm going to suggest slightly higher for when someone's going into a deficit, as that can be quite appropriate. So I'm going to go somewhat down the middle. I'm going to go towards that 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight as an 80 kilo individual. That takes us to 176 grams of protein. 1 gram of protein equals 4 calories. So we're looking at 704 calories coming from our protein intake on a daily basis. 1,456 calories are remaining, and that's what we're going to use to fill with fat and carbs. So I normally suggest not going beneath 20% of your calorie intake from fat if you are male, and for females more like 25 to 30%. Don't go beneath that of your intake in fat. So I'm going to say that we are working with a male who has a preference for carbs. So with that in mind, we'll go down to the very lower limit at 20% of our calories coming in from fat. That gives us 432 calories. 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So the rest of our calories are going to be filled out from carbs. If we add our protein and our fat intake, so that's 704 plus 432, that equals 1,024. I've got my iPad here. I've written this all out. I can't do maths that quickly. So 1,024 calories are going to be coming from our carbs. 1 gram of carb equals 4 calories. That gives us 256 grams of carbs on a daily basis. Got all those numbers? Excellent. So using the previous video's food examples, we're going to try and match roughly to those numbers I've given at the start of this video. Obviously, this isn't going to make for very nice meals, but I want to try and keep this all in context. And of course, you put it into the context of your foods at home. So I've entered the goals into MyFitnessPal. So I'm going to be referring to my iPad, so do forgive me for looking down a fair bit during this. So I've changed the calories to our 2,160 calorie goal for a slight deficit for a male who is 80 kilos. So on MyFitnessPal, if you haven't used it already, you can only change it via percentage. So I just try to get the grams as close as possible to those goals that I mentioned earlier in the video. So obviously fat is easy because I base that off a percentage anyway. So we got 48 grams there. Protein was a little lower than what I had said at 162 grams. So I'll probably aim to be a little bit over. And then our carbohydrates are 270 grams, which I think was a little lower if I recall correctly. Sorry, a little bit higher. So I could probably change the carbohydrates and protein around, but 5% is quite a big change. Protein got taken up to, I think, 190 grams, which was a little higher than I wanted. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. So long as you've got a rough idea of what you're aiming for, you can always go over. MyFitnessPal doesn't stop tracking if you go over. So by all means, that's what I'm going to try to do via my pretend tracking that I've done today. So I had some of, remember this is all pretend, this is the worst kind of meals you could imagine. This would be so bland, but this just gives you an idea of tracking and taking into account your calories and your macros. So skyr yogurt, 150 grams, 95 calories. Coconut milk, 40 calories at 200 mils. Spaghetti, 100 grams of it was 356 calories. Tuna, 120 grams, 136 calories. Incredible curried chickpeas, 125 grams, 168 calories. Some potatoes, 200 grams, 164 calories. 200 grams of apples, 110 calories. Philadelphia, 100 grams is 225 calories. Then I had 60 milliliters, don't know why that's measured in that, at 212 calories. Some more spaghetti, because this dude is a fiend for his pasta, a fiend for his carbs. Remember, we set them high anyway. So within context, absolutely fine. He's going to have himself another 100 grams at 356 calories. And then to finish off, another bit of yogurt because he just fancied it and he needed to make up his extra bit of protein. I'm now talking third person now. I'll talk about third person or myself either way. That's confusing. Whatever. Philadelphia, 100 grams, 225 calories. So I finished the day, or he finished the day at 2,182 calories. So a little bit over the goal, but that's going to happen the next day. Maybe I'll be a little bit under. You know, these minor discrepancies are always going to happen. You're not going to ever be exact. So I'm 22 calories over. Then when we look at the macro breakdown, I'm at 250 grams of carbs in total, 55 grams of fat, and 159 grams of protein. So when we look at the numbers I talked about earlier, a little bit, I think that's bang on the carbs. I need to double check. We're actually a little bit under by 6 grams on carbs, a little bit over on fat at 7 grams over, and protein's a fair bit under. The protein should have been at 176 and we're at 159. However, we are within the sufficient range that I would want someone in, between 1.6 to 2.9. Remember I said up to 2.9, 2.9 being really quite high, but in a deficit it's in someone's interest to actually go quite high in protein because of its satiating properties and because of its muscle preservation properties. So 159 grams is within that. It's not the goal I intended. So perhaps the next day we would try to up that protein a little bit, drop that fat down a little bit. And that's essentially it. So all I've done is scan via MyFitnessPal, and then you know, you should weigh what you're having, and that's where the inconvenience of calorie tracking can come in. Weighing something, if you're making a meal of many different ingredients, can be inconvenient, but also it's very difficult to estimate the calories otherwise, which is why I am leaning towards suggesting MyFitnessPal. So a little bit more on that. I think calorie tracking is so important for everyone, but the way I like to think of it is it depends on the individual. Number one, Will they get obsessed with these numbers? Will they stop being so intuitive with their hunger because their numbers are incorrect or correct depending on their goals, and they eat simply down to those numbers? Number two, are they going to do this for the rest of their lives? I would hope not. I would hope not. And number three, I would want to use this as a very, very much an educational tool. So I think for everyone, they should all do calorie tracking for 3 to 6 months. And with that, they start to understand the context of their foods, how much or how little they can have depending on their goals. I hope this video has helped. See you guys soon.